My name is Claire Whitaker, and my entire life is a performance so flawless not even my children know who I really am. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. By day, I'm everything a woman is told she should be. Smiling mother, helpful wife, efficient school librarian with a talent for making children fall in love with reading. At PTA meetings, I'm the one with homemade scones and color-coded event plans. The other moms think I'm peaceful, the kind who meditates before dawn and ends her nights with warm herbal tea. They're not entirely wrong. I do sit in stillness. I do hold teacups. But I do it while listening to old cassette tapes of people I no longer trust. I do it while sorting through files I wasn't supposed to access. I do it while watching footage that makes my stomach twist. Because when the sun goes down and the house quiets, I change. I become someone else, someone I've hidden for years. A researcher, a tracker, a woman looking for what was stolen from her. I didn't ask to be this. But secrets don't sleep. And once you hear them whisper, you either listen or they consume you. It started or restarted 6 months ago. The trigger wasn't dramatic. No exploding bomb, no anonymous letter. Just an old cookbook. I was reaching for a spice on the top shelf of the pantry when the book tumbled out, hitting me squarely on the shoulder. Wholesome Country Meals. The kind of dusty relic my mother loved. I hadn't touched it since she passed. I probably wouldn't have opened it now if I hadn't seen the edge of something sticking out. A photo. It was torn in half like someone had angrily ripped it apart. A young woman, dark hair, laughing at someone just outside the frame. In the background, a man in a uniform, face obscured, holding a baby. The woman wasn't my mother. The man wasn't my father. But the baby was me. I just knew. I don't remember going to bed that night. But I remember waking up at 3:12 a.m., sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, the photo in my lap, my laptop open, and 3 genealogy tabs already running. My husband Greg stirred in the other room but didn't come out. He's learned not to interrupt me when I get like this. He thinks it's a phase, that the grief from losing my mom is manifesting in obsessive ways. He doesn't know it started long before she died. He doesn't know I remember things I'm not supposed to remember, like the fire, or the screaming, or someone whispering in my ear. You're going to forget all of this. You'll be safe soon. Except I didn't forget. Not entirely. In the daylight, I made pancakes, packed lunches, signed permission slips. But in the dark, I dissected decades of my life. That week alone, I ordered 12 public record documents under aliases I keep memorized like old friends. I even wrote to a retired fire investigator in Oregon, someone who'd once worked my aunt's fatal fire, but had been silenced in court. 2 weeks after the photo incident, I met my sister for brunch. She doesn't know I call her my sister in my mind. She's technically my cousin Holly. But we grew up in the same house after her parents died, and mine took her in. Only she was always treated like the fragile one, the one they protected. I asked her if she remembered the woman in the photo. She sipped her mimosa too fast. Which one? I showed it to her. Her hand trembled. That's no one, she said. Where did you even get this? I waited, said nothing. She added quieter. You shouldn't go looking, Claire. Some things are broken on purpose. That sentence, some things are broken on purpose. It haunted me. It felt rehearsed, like something she'd been told to say, not something she believed. That night, I dug deeper. I found a private server containing a sealed psychiatric report from 1987, the year I turned 10. My name appeared in the notes. Apparently, I'd been treated for night terrors and dissociative memory symptoms. But here's the thing. I have no memory of therapy, no recollection of hospitals, no images of doctors. Only dreams of running, flames, and a baby crying in another room. I didn't sleep again for days. Greg noticed. One morning, as I hovered over my laptop long after sunrise, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've got to stop this," he said gently. "It's not healthy." I smiled. "I just want to know where I came from. You're from here. This house. This family. Me. The boys. Isn't that enough?" I looked up at him. For a long moment I didn't recognize his face. I saw him, really saw him as a man who had quietly benefited from my confusion, from my silence. "No," I said, "it isn't." He didn't reply, just walked out. But I knew then Greg knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to make him afraid. My oldest son, Andrew, came into the kitchen not 5 minutes later. He yawned tousled hair, holding his AP history textbook like it was a pillow. "You okay, Mom?" I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes the same green as mine. But something about his nose, his chin, different. Familiar, but not from Greg. "Yeah," I lied. "Just looking through old memories." He kissed my cheek and went back to his room. I watched him go and whispered to the empty room. Old memories. Or borrowed ones. Because now I wasn't just hunting answers about myself. I was starting to wonder if even my children had been part of the lie. The morning after I found the photo, I sat on the edge of our bathtub staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked like mine, but something felt off. Like I'd been wearing a costume for decades and it was finally starting to slip. The noise of breakfast filtered in from the kitchen. Greg clinking dishes. The boys arguing over cereal. My life still functioned like a well-oiled machine, but I was rusting inside. I had a therapy session scheduled that morning. Dr. Latham. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. Not since I told her I was better. She sat in her usual chair, legs crossed, notepad ready, that calm, oceanic voice. "Claire," she said, tilting her head. "You look tired." "I've been dreaming again," I murmured, folding my hands, "and remembering things I shouldn't." Her pen froze. "Like what?" "There's a room. I'm small. There's a fire outside. And someone screaming my name, not Claire, though. Something else." She blinked. "What name?" "I don't know. But I answer to it." We sat in silence for a long time. She scribbled something. Then she leaned forward gently. "Claire, sometimes our minds create stories to protect us. Trauma buries memories. If you force them to the surface too fast, they don't feel like stories," I interrupted. "They feel like someone else's memories were poured into me." Dr. Latham looked truly concerned. "Claire, this sounds like dissociation, possibly from childhood trauma. You should be careful with what you're chasing." That word chasing stuck in my head, because that's exactly what it felt like. Not research, not curiosity, but pursuit. I left the session with a prescription for something to help me sleep. I threw it in the trash before I reached my car. On the way home, I made a detour. My mother's house, now technically mine, sat at the edge of Maple Hollow, just outside the newer developments. It was quiet there. Too quiet. I hadn't stepped foot inside since the funeral. Not because of grief, but because the silence inside that house wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. I unlocked the front door and walked in the air stale with thyme and lemon polish. Everything was preserved museum-like. My mother had kept things immaculate, as if she knew one day people would be combing through her life for answers. I stood in the hallway staring at the old grandfather clock, then the hall closet. My feet moved on their own. I opened the closet and pulled the false panel aside, a trick I hadn't remembered until just that moment. Behind it was a narrow wooden staircase that spiraled down into the crawl space. My hands trembled as I took each step. I hadn't been down there since I was a child. The bulb overhead flickered. The floor was lined with boxes labeled in her handwriting: Christmas, photo albums, estate records. But in the back corner was a trunk, one I didn't remember. It was heavy, dust-coated, and locked with a brass latch. But years of methodical obsession had taught me to keep a lockpick set in my car. I retrieved it and opened the trunk with a click that echoed too loud in the small space. Inside, folders, film negatives, a recorder, a file with the name C.N. Whitaker. I froze. That middle initial. My full name is Claire E. Whitaker. I pulled out the folder and opened it slowly. Inside, birth certificates, photos, letters, but none of them were mine. The birth certificate said Charlotte Nia Whitaker, born May 22, 1975. Mother unknown, father Alan Whitaker. Alan, my uncle, my father's brother, dead since I was 12. But here was his name, on a document tied to me, or to someone who looked a lot like me. I blinked hard, then scanned the rest of the documents. A psychological assessment from 1981, notes on language regression, a hand-scrawled note subject corrected by age 10, new name consistent. No relapse since. Subject corrected. I stumbled back the room, spinning. The dust in the air suddenly felt like smoke in my lungs. I dropped the papers and fled the crawl space, gasping for fresh air as I reached the front porch. I called Holly. She didn't answer. I sent her a photo of the birth certificate. No words. Just the image. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Where did you find this, Burnett? Now. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, I'm not burning anything. You lied to me. No response. Just those 3 haunting dots that eventually disappeared. That night back home, I made dinner in silence. The boys didn't notice. Greg didn't ask why I was pale and shaking. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he already did. After everyone went to bed, I sat at my desk and laid out the documents in the moonlight. Charlotte Nia Whitaker. A girl who looked like me. Born to no mother. Adopted by silence. Who was she? Who was I? And then I saw it, a stamp on the back of one of the folders, Dr. Elias M. Brandt, Clinical Memory Research 1985. A memory researcher. I'd never heard the name before, but my fingers moved instinctively. Within minutes, I'd found an obituary. He'd died in 2003. But he'd published several papers on childhood memory suppression and identity realignment for trauma survivors. Buried in a long article from an old psychology journal, I found the term, protective identity overlay the creation of a false but functional identity following traumatic disruption of early memories. Most effective before age 10, often irreversible without emotional destabilization. Overlay, like wallpaper over a broken wall. Like me. My heart pounded. I wasn't looking for a scandal anymore. I was looking for myself. And I had no idea who was staring back in the mirror every morning. I made a decision that night. I would find out who Charlotte was. And if she was me, if they'd built me on top of her to bury something, I would uncover it layer by layer. Even if it destroyed the family who claimed to love me. I used to believe childhood was a blur because that's just how memory works. The brain forgets. The details get soft stories, dissolve trauma numbs. But now I know my past wasn't blurry. It was erased. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Elias Brandt, the man who had supposedly perfected memory suppression in children. I searched through his published studies, case reports, even old university records. His final article was titled, When Memory Protects the Body but Kills the Soul. I stared at those words for what felt like an hour. Then something strange happened. While scrolling through an archived psychology conference list from 1992, I saw his name listed as a keynote speaker. And beneath that, Whitaker Allen, private sponsor and case consultant. My uncle, my dead uncle, listed as a consultant on childhood memory suppression. That was when I decided to go back to the house, not my mother's, my Uncle Alan's. It was still there, barely a weathered colonial at the edge of Ridgeview. After his death, it had passed to a property holding company. But I'd always remembered it as the place where I used to play on weekends, the house with the red door and the hidden attic where we weren't allowed to go. I hadn't stepped foot inside since I was 12. I faked a call to the real estate office and scheduled a walkthrough for possible purchase. The realtor was young and distracted, spending most of the time on her phone as I wandered room to room, letting memory guide me. The house felt different yet familiar, like a face aged by decades but still recognizable in the eyes. I asked about the attic. She shrugged. Never been up there. The door's sealed. Old wiring, probably. Insurance won't cover access. I waited for her to take a call on the porch, then picked the lock with a tension wrench I'd carried since college. The latch gave with a soft crack. The door groaned open. Cold air spilled out. The attic stairs creaked under my weight. The moment I stepped onto the top floor, my breath caught. The room wasn't dusty. It wasn't empty. It wasn't untouched. It was preserved. A child's bed sat in the corner, white frame, soft yellow sheets with faded ducks on them. Shelves of books. A doll with missing hair. A rocking chair. And on the wall, in fading crayon, Sish Aral Otete. I stumbled back, my knees shaking. I knew this room. Not logically, not from memory, but in my bones. I dropped to the floor and touched the edge of the sheet. It was soft. Recently washed. My throat clenched. Someone had kept this place clean. I turned toward the bookshelf and pulled one of the old children's books, Mandy's Garden Adventure. When I opened the cover, a small square photo slipped out. A child around 5 sat in that same bed, a woman next to her, dark-haired, smiling, holding the child's hand. I stared at the child. Her eyes were mine. But I didn't remember this woman. She wasn't my mother. I turned the photo over, scribbled in cursive on the back. Our last night together, before the change. M. The change. I dropped the photo like it had burned me. My mind reeled. That wasn't just a metaphor. They had done something. Rewritten me. Rewired me. Swapped one life for another. Why? I sat in the rocking chair and let the truth crash over me. This room was mine. Charlotte's. A room frozen in time and locked away just like the part of me that remembered it. I didn't know how long I stayed there. When I finally left, I thanked the realtor and lied. Too many structural issues, I said. She nodded, not even listening. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my dining table, the photo in front of me, the name M, echoing in my head. I tried to think, who was M? Could it be my biological mother? I searched old records again. Nothing on Charlotte Whitaker's birth mother. Nothing in state registries. But one document listed a woman as a temporary legal guardian for a minor patient, female, age 5, name redacted. That woman, Marion Grieve. The name struck something deep inside me, like a forgotten melody. She'd been a nurse at a now-shuttered private psychiatric clinic, Westland Haven, located less than an hour away. The next morning, I called what remained of the clinic's foundation. Claimed I was a doctoral student researching historical mental health treatments. They agreed to let me view the grounds. I drove there, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Westland was nothing more than a skeleton of buildings now stripped bare by time and lawsuits. The administrator led me around half-heartedly, then excused himself to take a call. I broke away the moment his back turned and found my way to the staff records room, or what was left of it. Cabinets, old boxes, dust and mold. But in one box near the bottom, I found a staff directory from 1981, and there she was. Grieve Marion, pediatric unit nurse. I scanned the page. There was a photo. The same woman from the picture in the attic. I had found her, but the name had a red stamp beside it. Deceased 1987. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. That's the same year I was treated for night terrors. The same year my memories stopped. The same year Charlotte vanished. I left the clinic without another word. But as I pulled away from the crumbling building, I knew something had cracked open. I hadn't just found Charlotte's room. I'd found the ghost of the woman who tried to save her. And someone made sure that woman never spoke again. The night after I found the attic room, Charlotte's room, I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishwasher stopped humming, staring at the photo of Marion Grieve. I traced the line of her smile with my fingertip, a distant comfort blooming inside me like a memory just out of reach. Who was she to me? A nurse? Yes, but more than that. A mother, a savior. And what had she seen that made her dangerous? The death record listed only undisclosed causes, the vague phrasing that often cloaked secrets, not accidents. I couldn't shake the feeling she died because of me. Because she'd tried to protect Charlotte. Me. I had to get closer to her. I needed to find where she lived. Who knew her? Someone had to remember her story, even if the system tried to erase it. But the answer didn't come from old obituaries or online archives. It came strangely from my day job. I was cataloging a donation of psychology textbooks at the school library, a box donated by a former professor from the state university. Most were dry thick with outdated terminology, but one slim volume caught my eye: Trauma and Constructed Memory Cases and Consequences. I opened it randomly and saw a marginal note scrawled in blue ink. W was right. M tried to stop it. Failed. I froze. It couldn't be coincidence. Not with those initials. W and M Whitaker and Marion. My heart thudded. I flipped through the rest of the book, hands shaking. Several more notes were peppered through the margins, cryptic, frantic, almost manic. C said too much. Took her away. She doesn't remember. That's the point. 1987, the reset. Just one girl. Could be reversed. Could be reversed. I sat back in my chair, stunned. My blood rushed so loudly I could barely hear the library clock ticking. This wasn't just someone speculating about memory science. This was someone involved. Someone who knew what had been done to me or to Charlotte. I turned to the inside cover looking for any indication of ownership. Scrawled at the bottom in neat block letters, "Property of A. Whitaker, Private." My uncle, again. He hadn't just consulted on memory suppression, he'd documented it, studied it, and he'd left traces, intentionally or not, in a donated book, like an accidental confession. Unless it wasn't accidental. What if he wanted someone to find this? I copied the notes, photographed every page. Then I slipped the book under my jacket and walked out without checking it in. That night, I read the notes over and over. Some were too fragmented to understand, but one stuck with me. M's notebook was hidden. Room 308, Haven. Room 308, Westland Haven, the facility Marion worked at. I hadn't seen any such room when I visited, but the building had 3 floors, and the staff tour had only covered 2. The third was sealed, too dangerous, they said. Collapsing. The next morning, I returned. I didn't call ahead. I parked behind the ruins and slipped through a back door I'd noticed before. The hallways upstairs were choked with debris. Ceilings sagged. Wallpaper peeled like skin. But I found the sign. 308. The door was jammed, swollen from years of rain. I used a crowbar from my trunk to wrench it open. Inside, dust, mold, a broken metal bed frame, and in the far corner behind a fallen cabinet, a dented file box. I pulled it out, heart racing, and flipped it open. Not a file, a journal. Marion's name was on the inside cover. I opened to the first page. She's not safe here. They keep changing her. Her name, her memories. They say it's for her healing, but I don't believe them anymore. Page after page detailed her observations about me. Charlotte. She called me sweet but confused. Described my distress when I woke up not recognizing faces. How I cried when I saw a photo of myself and didn't know it was me. And then something else. A page folded twice and marked with a paperclip. Today I overheard Alan Whitaker and Dr. Brandt discussing the overlay procedure. They said, Claire is easier to manage than Charlotte. They said the memories would settle. But she still fights it. Every time they mention fire, she flinches. Every time someone says her name, she pauses. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't theory anymore. This was documented fact. I wasn't Claire because I grew into her. I was Claire because they made me. I was Charlotte first, and they buried her alive inside me. And Marion had tried to stop it. She had documented it, saved it, risked her job for it. Maybe her life. I stared at the last page, scribbled in red ink, barely legible. They're watching me. If something happens to me, tell her. Tell Charlotte she wasn't crazy. She was stolen. She was real. That was the last thing she ever wrote. I sat there in that rotting room, knees pressed to my chest, the journal clutched in my hands like a life raft. The smell of decay filled my nose, but I didn't move. Couldn't. Because for the first time in my life, someone real had said my name. And believed me. When I got home that night, I didn't speak. I couldn't. I placed Marion's journal on my nightstand, washed my hands in scalding water, and sat on the edge of our bed as Greg watched TV downstairs, a documentary about mountain climbers oblivious to the fact that I had just descended into the darkest crevice of my own life. I thought about the red ink on Marion's last page. Tell Charlotte she wasn't crazy. She was stolen. That sentence looped in my mind like a prayer and a warning. For years, I'd been dismissed for overanalyzing feeling too much carrying stress like luggage. Now I knew the truth. The stress wasn't mine. It was implanted a cage built from lies, guilt, and manipulation. And the man I shared a bed with? He was no longer above suspicion. Greg had always been a good father, reliable, steady. But there were cracks I hadn't noticed before, or maybe refused to. The subtle way he changed the subject whenever I mentioned my mother's death. How he encouraged me to let go of my past obsessions. The time he said, "You're better now," after I'd cried over a dream I couldn't explain. But most of all, the trip. 4 years ago, he told me he had to fly to Portland for a conference. He even brought back a souvenir mug. But 2 months later, while organizing old tax files, I'd seen a hotel receipt from Briar Hill Lodge, a private guest estate outside Providence. The stay was 5 nights, not Portland, and not a conference. When I asked him, he looked me square in the eye and said, "That's not mine. Must have been some billing error." And I believed him. But now everything had changed. That lie, that weekend, that place. What if it had something to do with them? With the family who built my mind like a mosaic, beautiful from afar, but fractured underneath. I retrieved the receipt from the file box in the closet. I had kept it strangely like a subconscious breadcrumb. It was dated April 17, 2019, room 2B, under the name G. Whitaker. I searched Briar Hill Lodge online. Boutique estate, remote, no children allowed, guest privacy guaranteed. I called them. A woman answered, pleasant and formal. "Briar Hill Lodge. How can I help you?" I smiled tightly. "Hi, I'm trying to confirm a past reservation. My husband stayed there in April 2019, room 2B. Greg Whitaker." A pause. "I'm sorry, but we don't release guest records without permission." "Of course," I said, still smiling. "I just wanted to confirm whether he was alone, or with someone else. You see, I'm trying to track the last movements of a woman named Marion Grieve. She might have stayed under a different name, but..." The line went dead. Disconnected. Abrupt. Not a coincidence. I stood there, phone still in hand, listening to the hollow silence of the dial tone. And I realized they weren't just watching Marion back then. They were still watching, listening, erasing. That night, I waited until Greg was asleep. I crept downstairs, turned off the Wi-Fi, and connected an old laptop, one I hadn't used in years, clean from any synced accounts, to a hotspot from a burner phone. I searched Briar Hill Lodge again, but this time used a different route. I searched property deeds, employee forums, even building permits. Anything that might reveal more. I found something. The lodge had a previous owner before the current hospitality group bought it, Whitaker Holdings LLC, purchased in 1996. Sold in 2020, 1 year after Greg's mysterious visit. I leaned back in my chair. Greg's family had owned the lodge. So that trip, it wasn't a weekend getaway. It was a return to headquarters. I remembered something else then, a conversation we had during a fight long before kids. I had accused him of being emotionally distant, and he snapped, "You don't want me to open up, Claire. If I did, it would ruin you." At the time, I thought it was cruel hyperbole, a man protecting his ego. Now I wondered if it was the only honest thing he ever said. In the morning, Greg made scrambled eggs like he always did on Saturdays. He kissed the back of my neck and said, "You seem rested." I smiled faintly. Must be the air. But every word, every gesture between us now felt like theater. Two actors pretending this wasn't a stage built from stolen identities and suppressed memories. I asked, careful with my tone, "Remember when you went to Portland that one spring?" He stirred the eggs a little faster. "Sure. Conference. Why?" "I came across a receipt the other day. Briar Hill Lodge. Providence. 5 nights. He didn't look at me. You said it was a billing error, I added softly. He placed the spatula down, turned to me, and leaned against the counter. His expression was calm. Too calm. Claire, why are you digging this up? I shrugged. Just curious. He stared for a beat too long, then said Portland. Providence. Doesn't matter. That was years ago. I watched his eyes. Not a flicker of guilt. Just calculation. His tone was steady, but I could feel the tension building in the room like static. You've been acting strange lately, he added. Waking up at 2 a.m., skipping meals. It's not healthy. He was trying to pivot, control the frame. I'm fine, I said, just remembering things I'd forgotten. He went quiet. Then he smiled, that practiced, neutral smile that never reached his eyes. Well, he said, some memories are better left buried, right? Right. But that smile confirmed what I feared. He knew. He knew who Charlotte was. And worse, he knew I was her. I couldn't look at Greg the same way anymore. Every word he spoke now landed differently, too smooth, too careful, like every sentence had been pre-cleared by someone else. The next morning, while he took the boys to soccer practice, I returned to the attic and reread Marion's journal. I needed something concrete, something that could verify Charlotte's origin beyond the journal's notes and my own unraveling dreams. What I needed was proof in ink and record. A birth record, a hospital file, something official. The problem. My official birth certificate listed my mother as Elaine Whitaker, the woman who raised me and my father as George Whitaker, her late husband. Both documents were clean sealed and state-issued, but Marion's notes hinted otherwise. Birth record altered. Real mother hidden. Admin nurse warned me, says original file sealed. Room 412 Medical Archive. Room 412. It wasn't much to go on, but Westland Haven once shared a records archive with Briar Hill Medical, a private women's hospital that had closed down 20 years ago. The building still existed, converted into an archive storage facility for medical researchers. I called ahead under a fake name using credentials I'd borrowed from a friend who used to work in medical records. I told them I was a graduate student writing a thesis on private obstetric facilities and needed access to files from the 1970s and 80s. The administrator was hesitant but agreed to a 30-minute window. I dressed conservatively, wore glasses I didn't need, and brought a notepad filled with questions I wouldn't ask. Once inside, I was ushered through a labyrinth of steel drawers and filing cabinets stacked like tombstones. Room 412 was toward the back, humid, dim. I found a wall of files labeled by year. I opened 1975, the year Charlotte was born. Dozens of folders lined the drawer. I flipped through quickly, heart racing, until I found one marked Female Infant, No Maternal ID, 05/22/75. I pulled it out. Thick file, paper yellowing with time. The top page confirmed it. Infant female, 7 lbs, 9 Aussie, delivered by C-section. No maternal identification provided at time of admission. Father's name, Alan Whitaker. Infant tagged Charlotte Nia Whitaker. I felt lightheaded. He hadn't adopted me. He'd claimed me. I flipped through the rest of the file: neonatal charts, nurse's notes, and a pink slip at the bottom labeled Transfer Order. Patient reassigned from room 402 to Special Pediatric Ward, Westland Haven, for observation and therapeutic protocol per request of Mr. A. Whitaker and consulting Dr. Elias Brandt. My hands trembled. They had taken me from the maternity ward straight to a psychiatric hospital, not because I was ill, but because they intended to build me. To reprogram me. I blinked back nausea and returned to the first few pages. Tucked between lab reports was a scribbled margin note from a nurse. Mother asked for baby 3 times before sedation. Name not given. Brunette. Mid-30s. Unstable, but alert. I tore that page out. Before leaving, I asked the archive manager if I could photocopy the file. She said only with written institutional permission, so I did what I had to do. I excused myself to the restroom, hid in the stall, and scanned every single page with my phone. By the time I walked out of the building, I had 57 images. The truth was no longer just in my mind or Marion's journal. It was in official records. Time-stamped. Certified. Charlotte had been born into the world, and then disappeared. Stolen by her own blood. Back home, I spread the files across the dining table. Greg was still out with the boys. I worked quickly labeling each image, backing it up to encrypted storage. One particular scan made me freeze. The final page in the file, a consent form, signed not by my birth mother, not even by Alan Whitaker, but by Gregory Whitaker. The date, April 17th, 2019. The same weekend he'd lied about being in Portland. The same weekend he stayed at Briar Hill Lodge. The form authorized the transfer of remaining sealed documents from Briar Hill Medical to family-maintained storage, essentially ensuring that any trace of Charlotte's history would be taken out of public record. He hadn't just known, he had participated, and he'd done so recently, which meant someone had instructed him, or maybe blackmailed him, or maybe, and this was the most chilling thought, he'd done it willingly. To protect the family's design, to protect Claire, to keep Charlotte buried. I printed the document and left it on his pillow. That night, I didn't sleep in our bedroom. I stayed downstairs watching the hallway like a sentry. At 12:47 a.m., I heard his footsteps. Slow, deliberate. He walked down the stairs and stood in the doorway holding the printed page in one hand. His voice was low, steady. "Where did you get this?" I stood. "From the truth." He walked toward me, not menacing, but slow and heavy. He looked tired, like a man carrying the weight of generations. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said. "Why?" I whispered. "What are you hiding?" He didn't answer. He sat down at the edge of the couch and rested his head in his hands. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, without looking at me, he said, "You don't know what they would have done to you if they hadn't erased it. You screamed every night. You clawed at your skin. You said things no 5-year-old should say. They thought you'd die from the weight of it." "What was I screaming about?" I demanded. "Tell me." But he just shook his head. "They told me not to tell you. Ever." I stepped forward. "You told me. With your lies. With that weekend. With your name on that form." His hands curled into fists. "I was trying to protect what we built. Our family. Our boys. You don't remember what you went through, Claire. You begged to forget." "I wasn't Claire when I begged," I said coldly. "I was Charlotte." He looked up then, and for the first time I saw guilt. Real, raw guilt. Not fear of discovery, but shame, and maybe regret. But it was too late for that. I had the truth now, and I wouldn't stop until I knew everything. I didn't speak to Greg for 3 days. Not because I wanted silence, but because I feared what would come out of my mouth if I let myself speak. And maybe, if I was honest, I feared what else he might say in return. I wasn't ready for more truths. Not yet. So I functioned, dropped the boys off at school, attended a library fundraiser, smiled when someone commented, "You always look so calm." They didn't see the fever behind my eyes. At night, when the house went still, I returned to my war table, the long fold-out in the garage where I'd begun mapping everything. I had names, dates, hospital records, but I needed a pattern, a bigger picture, one that explained why I'd been erased. As I pinned up a timeline from Charlotte's birth in 1975 to the present, I noticed something. Marion Grieve died in 1987, Dr. Elias Brandt dead in 2003, my Aunt Lillian, the one who died in the house fire I still dream about, gone in 1985. A family friend, Annette Corsby, who used to babysit me, reported missing in 1988. All women, all connected to the Whitakers. All disappeared, silenced, or buried before their time. I opened a new browser tab and searched Whitaker family estate deaths. The results were unsettling. In 1991, the family's accountant, Lydia Hart, died from self-inflicted wounds after being investigated for tax fraud. In 1997, a cousin I never met, Naomi Whitaker, drowned on a boating trip. In 2001, a nanny named Sophie Tillman filed a police report about suspicious behavior in the Whitaker home. The case was closed, but Sophie was found in her car 2 weeks later, overdose ruled accidental. I scribbled every name on note cards and stuck them on the board. 12 women, all connected, all silenced. The story was no longer just about me. I was part of a system, a lineage, a design meant to protect the Whitaker legacy, not the people inside it. And somehow I was supposed to forget this. But the memories were coming back even when I didn't ask. At night, I dreamed of a staircase soaked in water, of crying behind walls, of someone calling out a name Charlotte, and then the silence that followed. And I remembered a phrase, a man's voice saying, "If she forgets, she won't testify. If she forgets, she won't destroy us." Had I witnessed something? Had Charlotte seen something the family couldn't allow her to remember? Was the entire memory suppression not for my healing, but for their survival? I needed to know more. I revisited the last person who might still hold pieces, Holly. My cousin, my sister in all but name. The one who told me months ago, some things are broken on purpose. I drove to her home unannounced. Her neighborhood was two pristine identical hedges, flower beds that never bloomed too much. The kind of place secrets were buried in mulch and smiled over. She opened the door with her usual tight smile. "Claire, we need to talk," I said, holding up a photo, one of Marion's journal pages. The one with the line, "Claire is easier to manage than Charlotte." Holly stepped aside without a word. Inside her home smelled like lemon oil and quiet denial. We sat on the couch. I didn't offer small talk. "I know about Marion. I know about the overlay. I know I'm Charlotte." Her face didn't move for a second. Then her eyes closed. And for the first time, I saw something crack. "I begged them not to do it," she whispered. "Who?" "Your uncle, my father, and the council." "Council?" She looked at me, suddenly afraid. "Holly," I pressed, "what is the council?" She began pacing, her arms wrapped around herself. "You think the Whitakers are just a family? But they're not. They're an institution. Every generation has men who are chosen to maintain the line, preserve the silence. They call it the covenant." My heart dropped. "This sounds like a cult," I said. "It's not that simple," she snapped. "It's business, Claire. It's politics. It's control. The Whitakers fund judges, doctors, researchers. Memory suppression wasn't about healing trauma. It was about erasing liability." I stood now, too, pulse pounding. What did Charlotte see? What did I see? She stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "You saw Lillian burn." I froze. She wasn't alone in that house, Holly continued. She was trying to expose them. She'd uncovered files, adoption records, bribes, tests on children. She planned to go public. She was murdered. Holly nodded. "And you were the only witness. But you were 5, terrified. So Alan arranged for treatment. He said it would protect you. Said they'd take the pain away." "They took me away," I spat. "They thought if they made you, Claire gave you a soft life, a new name, clean memories, they'd be safe. You were the last threat." My breath caught. "Does Greg know about this?" Her silence said yes. "I thought you'd never remember," she whispered. I grabbed my bag, sick to my stomach. At the door, I paused. 12 women. Holly. Maybe more. How many more have to disappear before this ends? She didn't answer. I drove home with one goal: make this public. I backed up every file, every journal page, every photo. I wrote a letter to my sons, not to explain everything, but to let them know I loved them, no matter what came next. Because I wasn't just Claire anymore. I was Charlotte. I was the memory they tried to burn. And I was ready to speak. I used to believe that memories were like old film reels, delicate, flickering, grainy in places, that they needed light to play. But what I discovered next wasn't a flicker. It was a voice. And it didn't need light. It needed only to be heard. It started when I returned to my mother's house to retrieve Marion's journal, the original. I had already scanned every page, but I wanted the physical proof. Now wanted to hold the fragile thing that had anchored my truth when everything else felt like fiction. As I searched through the same trunk in the crawl space, I noticed something I'd missed before. Wedged between 2 old board games was a cassette tape. Unlabeled, dusty, black plastic dulled with time. I froze. There was only one player in the house that could read it, the tape deck in my mother's old bedroom. I hadn't turned it on in years. I wasn't even sure it still worked. I carried the tape upstairs like it might shatter. The player whined when I pressed play. Static crackled, followed by the faint hum of breathing. Then a voice. A woman's voice. Weak. Raw. Unfiltered by memory. My name is Marion Grieve. If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. My stomach twisted. I leaned in closer, barely breathing. I tried everything. They wouldn't listen. I begged them. I showed them the bruises, the drawings. I even told Dr. Brandt. He said she'd forget it all, that it would be better. But she remembered. Even after the first overlay, she remembered. A pause, more static. Charlotte isn't broken. She's terrified. And they made her that way. The recording cracked, hissed, then steadied. The fire. It wasn't an accident. Lillian knew too much. She had the records. I told her not to stay in that house. She thought the truth would protect her. Another silence. Longer this time. Then quieter. Alan said she couldn't be saved. That sacrifice was part of legacy. He said if I told anyone, they'd come for me next. A breath shuddering. Then the final line. Charlotte, if this finds you, you were loved. Even when they tried to make you forget it. The tape ended. I sat frozen, the words repeating in my head like a heartbeat. She'd made that recording knowing it would be hidden. Knowing it might never be found. She'd buried it like a seed, hoping one day someone me would find it and let it bloom. I rewound it and recorded it onto my phone. 3 copies, one to cloud storage, one to a USB. One emailed to an anonymous journalist I'd followed for years, someone who specialized in corporate and institutional cover-ups. I didn't write an explanation. I just sent the file with a single subject line. They made me forget. That night, I returned home and found Greg waiting in the living room. He stood when I entered. Silent. Hands at his sides. I know what you found, he said. Then you know it's over. He nodded slowly. They know too. A chill rippled down my spine. What does that mean? They sent someone to talk to me. 2 nights ago. After you went quiet. Talk, I repeated. Or threaten. He looked at me with eyes I no longer trusted. They don't want this going public. They want you to stop. I stepped back, my hand instinctively resting on my phone. So what? You came to scare me into silence again. He flinched just slightly, then shook his head. No, I came to give you this. He held out a manila envelope. Inside photographs. Scanned copies of court documents, psychiatric evaluations, ledger entries, things I had never seen before. What is this? The rest of it, he said. The part they buried. The part even I wasn't supposed to see. I flipped through the documents, a therapy transcript, where I, as Charlotte, described the room with chains. A bill to the Whitaker Trust for sedation drugs. A letter from Dr. Brandt to Alan Whitaker reading, overlay incomplete, patient still resisting, recommend additional trauma buffer. Additional trauma buffer. I couldn't stop shaking. They hurt me, I whispered. Greg looked away. They thought it was the only way. They told me you were dangerous, that your memories would collapse you, that you begged to forget. I stepped toward him, fire rising in my throat. I begged because I was a child. Not because I didn't deserve truth. You built a life with me based on a lie. I built a life with the only version of you they let me have, he said, voice cracking. And I fell in love with her anyway. Silence stretched like a wire between us. I sent the tape, I said finally, to a journalist. If anything happens to me, it's already backed up. He didn't move, didn't argue. I'm not running anymore, I added. I know, he said. I just came to warn you, and to say I'm sorry. Then he walked out. I didn't follow. I stayed awake that night listening to the silence. Every creak in the house felt heavier, every shadow longer, but I didn't feel alone. For the first time, I felt remembered. Like I had reached through the fog and found the girl they buried. And she was real. Still here. Still fighting. In the morning, I woke the boys for school-packed lunches and smiled at their sleepy eyes. They didn't know that their mother, the woman tying their shoelaces and signing permission slips, had once been a child no one wanted to remember. But one day I would tell them everything. Because this family would no longer be built on silence. They said it was a candle. That was the official explanation for the fire that killed my Aunt Lillian. A candle left too close to a curtain. Tragic. Unfortunate. Case closed. But I'd always remembered something else. The sound of glass breaking. My own voice screaming her name. The smell of gasoline before the smoke. It was the earliest memory I had, or perhaps the only one that had slipped through the cracks of my carefully curated identity. After Marion's tape and Greg's envelope, I knew I had to return to the source of that fire. Lillian's house had long since been sold, but public records still held the fire report. I drove to the county archive office with a forged research credential and requested the full incident file from 1985. It took an hour for them to find it, but when they did, the man behind the desk looked at the folder, frowned, and said, "Huh, that's odd. This one's double-stamped, recertified in '93. Why, I asked. Usually that means something was corrected in the original record. I took the folder into the reading room and opened it carefully. The original report, dated June 5, 1985, listed the fire as accidental, caused by candle exposure to flammable material. The pages were brittle, but legible. Then stapled to the back was a second version, retyped, marked confidential. In it, the cause of the fire had been changed to undetermined ignition source. Not a candle. No mention of wax. But what made my hands shake was the fire investigator's original note written in ink on the back of the diagram page. Accelerant pattern suggests deliberate ignition. Entry point forced. Room was locked from outside. I stared at that one sentence for a long time. Lillian hadn't died in an accident. She'd been trapped, locked in, burned alive. And I had seen it. At 5 years old, I had seen it. But they made me forget. I flipped through the rest of the folder and found one more strange detail, a note that a child was pulled from the upstairs hallway during the fire. Uninjured. Identity not confirmed at scene. That child was me. I suddenly remembered the dream. Not just the staircase, but a hand pulling me back. A voice whispering, "Don't look down. Don't look back." Someone had saved me, but someone else had made sure Lillian didn't make it out. I returned home with the report and scanned every page into my archive. Greg wasn't home. The boys were at a sleepover. The house was quiet. I went into the garage, pinned the fire diagram on the board, and drew a red thread between Lillian's name and my own. Then I saw it a date on the original form filed by investigator Dennis K. Holloway, Station 14. I checked the current department roster. Retired. But his name was attached to an old arson seminar on YouTube. I watched him speak, a tall man with a blunt voice and eyes that didn't blink much. I found a P.O. box address attached to a fire safety blog he'd written in 2009. I printed a letter and sent a copy of the diagram with it, along with one question handwritten across the bottom. "Did they make you change your report?" I didn't know if he'd reply, but if he did, it might be the final crack in the story. A few days later, I got a call. Unlisted number, male voice, gruff. "You, Claire Whitaker." "Yes. This is Dennis Holloway. I got your letter." My heart pounded, and there was a pause. Then he said I didn't change that report. Someone did. After I left the department. "Do you remember the case?" "I remember the body being charred beyond recognition and no candle ever being found. I also remember a man in a suit showing up 2 days later asking questions about Whitaker properties and liabilities." "Do you remember a child?" "Only that there was one, screaming like hell when they pulled her out. Blonde, covered in soot. Wouldn't speak for hours." I was silent. "Why are you asking now?" he finally said. "Because I said quietly I was that child. And they built a life on top of my silence." He didn't speak for a while. Then he sighed. "Tell your story," he said, "before someone else tells it for you." Then he hung up, and I knew what I had to do. The past wasn't done with me yet. Just when I thought I'd found every fracture in the story, every scorched record, every silenced witness, the past offered up one final breadcrumb. My father's watch. It had been sitting in my jewelry box for over a decade. A heavy thing with a cracked face and a worn leather band too masculine for my taste. I'd kept it after he died not because I cherished it, but because I couldn't throw it away. He wasn't my biological father, that much I now knew, but he was the man who raised Claire, the man who, along with Alan and the others, helped kill Charlotte. I took the watch out on a rainy afternoon. The kids were at a friend's birthday party. Greg was gone again, out somewhere, he said, for air. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. The watch was heavier than I remembered, a piece of machinery from another time. I ran my fingers along the inside of the band, hoping for something, anything. That's when I saw it, engraved inside the metal case back in fine, almost imperceptible script. BR 629-21. I tilted the watch toward the window. It wasn't a date, not coordinates, but it looked like a phone number. Old style, before area codes became standardized. I opened my laptop and searched vintage number formats. One article explained that certain numbers were used within private corporate switchboards in the 80s and 90s. Internal codes, extensions, hidden lines. I stared at the digits. Then I did what I always do. I called. My heart thudded in my throat as the line rang once, twice. Click. Briar Resource. Who may I direct your call to? I nearly dropped the phone. Briar. The name again. The same as Briar Hill Lodge. The same as the Briar Hill psychiatric wing that once housed children with identity divergence. I kept my voice calm. Yes, I'm looking for records tied to a former patient, Charlotte Nia Whitaker. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, we don't have any files under that name. What about Marion Grieve? I pushed. A pause. Ma'am, may I ask who is calling? No, I said. You may not. I hung up. The air felt thick. I sat back in my chair, staring at the phone in my hand. The number still worked. That meant the system, the machine, still existed, and someone was still maintaining it. I opened Greg's old file box and looked through the legal documents again. One envelope marked BR Confidential had always confused me. I had assumed BR stood for something banal, business records maybe. But now I knew, Briar Resource. I opened the envelope. Inside, a typed unsigned memo. One line stood out. All traceable documents related to subject CNW to be archived at BR Satellite Storage. No digital imprint. Subject CNW, Charlotte Nia Whitaker, me. I grabbed the whiteboard marker and circled the initials. Connected them to the phone number. Then to Greg. Then to Alan. Then finally to a name I hadn't dared say out loud in years. Eleanor Whitaker, my mother. Or rather, the woman who played the part. I knew her death certificate by heart, cause of death stroke, location assisted living home in Vermont, year 2020. But now I wondered, had she really died, or had she disappeared like all the others? I checked the satellite address of Briar Resources headquarters. Then I ran a secondary check on all facilities owned by the same trust. That's when I found it. Briar Reserve, Wellness and Legacy Center. A private senior facility located on a wooded estate 2 hours north. No website. Only an address and a single press release from 2012 about innovative memory care. I didn't hesitate. I packed a bag, printed the records, and left a note for the boys. I didn't tell Greg. I didn't tell anyone. I drove through a storm, the trees slick with rain headlights cutting into thick fog. When I reached the gates, I rolled down my window and gave a false name. The man at the gate didn't check ID. He waved me through. I parked, took a breath, walked through the doors. Inside, it was all soft light and instrumental music, clean linen, polished floors. Can I help you? A woman asked, smiling behind the front desk. I'm here to visit a resident, I said. Eleanor Whitaker. Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes shifted just slightly. I'm sorry, she said. We don't have anyone here by that name. I stared at her. You didn't even check. I don't need to. I have a right to see her, I said. I'm her daughter. The smile dropped. She picked up the phone, whispered something. 2 men in suits entered the lobby less than a minute later. Ma'am, one of them said. I think you should come with us. I didn't resist. I wanted to see where they'd take me. They led me down a quiet hallway past rooms with closed doors until we reached the end. Room 17. Inside, a single bed, white sheets. An oxygen tank. A woman sitting in a wheelchair facing the window. Gray hair, thin, pale. But when she turned, I knew. It was her. Eleanor. She blinked slowly. Her eyes met mine. And something passed between us. Something unspoken and fragile. Charlotte, she whispered. I felt my knees buckle. You remember me? She nodded once. Not always. But today, yes. Tears slid down my face. Why, I asked. Why did you let them do it? She looked out the window. Because they told me you would die if I didn't. Dee, you weren't eating. You weren't sleeping. You said the fire was inside your head. They said they could fix it. Make you forget. Make you happy. And you believed them. Her jaw tightened. I was weak. I knelt beside her chair. You were my mother. No, she whispered. I was your warden. I didn't know what to say. For a long time we sat in silence. Then she reached for my hand. Her skin was cold, thin as paper. I kept something, she said. In the drawer. I opened the nightstand. Inside a locket. I clicked it open. Inside 2 tiny photos. One of me as a child, not Claire but Charlotte. And one of a woman I didn't recognize. She was your real mother, Eleanor said softly. They never told me her name. I held the locket like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. I'm going to expose them, I said. All of them. Eleanor closed her eyes. Good. Then she whispered, I'll be gone soon. But you remember? That's enough. I left the wellness center with trembling hands and a locket pressed so tightly into my palm, the edges left tiny crescent marks in my skin. 2 faces inside it, mine, or rather Charlotte's, and a woman I'd never seen before. My real mother. Not Eleanor. Not the carefully curated replacement. The woman who carried me into the world and was erased. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't even sit still. The walls of my house, my normal house with its PTA flyers and refrigerator magnets, felt like a set on a stage I no longer wanted to play in. Greg hadn't come home. The boys were still at their friend's place. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. And for once, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt ready. I opened my laptop and searched everything I could about children born on May 22nd, 1975, in the state's hospital records. But the public database still listed me as Claire Elizabeth Whitaker. No mention of Charlotte. No maternal records under that date. So I ran a new search using a forensic genealogy tool one used in cold cases. I uploaded my raw DNA file from a test I'd taken years ago for fun, back when I thought I was just uncovering distant Irish roots and the occasional lactose intolerance. The tool connected me to dozens of distant relatives. Most were expected. Second cousins from my father's side. A few scattered matches on Eleanor's tree. But one match stood out. 95.3% DNA match. Female, age 49. Born, May 22, 1975. Location, Baltimore. Name, Jenna Noel Fields. My blood ran cold. Twins. Or what should have been twins. I clicked through her public profile. No mention of adoption. A photo showed her similar eyes, similar smile. A strange mirror. I messaged her, carefully, not claiming anything outright. Just curiosity. Hi, Jenna. I came across your profile through a DNA match. I think we may share a biological connection. Would you be open to chatting? Hours passed. I tried not to check obsessively, but around midnight she replied, Wow. This is unexpected. I knew I had half-siblings somewhere, but a full match, I'm in shock. I was adopted at birth? I don't know much. Do you? My breath caught. I typed, I was raised as Claire, but my birth name was Charlotte. I think we were both born on the same day, and someone tried to make sure we never met. She responded almost instantly. Can we talk, please? We scheduled a call. The next evening. When I heard her voice for the first time, it was like speaking into a canyon and hearing my echo call back, different tone, different rhythm, but undeniably connected. She told me her story. Adopted into a quiet family in rural Maryland. Always felt other. Told by her adoptive parents that she had been part of a closed twin case. That the other child hadn't survived birth. I never questioned it, she said, until I started having dreams. about fire, and screaming, and a name I didn't know was mine. Charlotte, I asked. No, she whispered. Lillian. I nearly dropped the phone. She used to come in my dreams when I was a kid, a woman with red hair. She'd sit on the edge of my bed and tell me not to be afraid, that she was watching me. Lillian was our aunt, I said. She died in a fire. I was there. I think you were meant to be too. We talked for hours that night. She sent me photos of herself. We could have been sisters, but not identical. Not quite. Same chin, same ears, same slight dimple in the right cheek. But it was her eyes that undid me. Not just because they looked like mine, but because they looked haunted. Just like mine. Do you think they separated us on purpose? She asked. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I think they kept me because I saw too much, I said. And they gave you away to protect the part of me they couldn't control. Silence. Then she asked softly, do you know who our mother was? No, not yet. But I have her picture. She gave me your face. Or maybe you gave me hers. We both cried then. Quiet, exhausted sobs, the kind of grief you can only feel for a life you never got to live. Sisters, separated, silenced, and now found. We agreed to meet in person, quietly, no press, no social media, just us. Before I ended the call, she said one last thing. I always knew something was missing, she whispered, but I never imagined it was you. I couldn't speak. My voice was gone. The next morning, I went to the garage and pulled down all the strings on the corkboard. Every red thread, every name, every date. I wasn't erasing it. I was simply acknowledging that the hunt had changed. I hadn't been looking for villains anymore. I'd been looking for myself. And now I'd found my other half. People say you can't run from the past. But the truth is, the past doesn't chase you. It waits. Quietly. Patiently. Like a locked room in a house you've always lived in. A room you've trained yourself not to notice. And then one day, something creaks. The door opens. And you realize it's not just a room. It's the entire house. That's what the past had become for me. Not a single memory or face, but the walls around me, the very shape of who I was. And every wall had been built deliberately to keep Charlotte in and keep the truth out. After my call with Jenna, I couldn't stop thinking about the scope of what had been done to me and to her. Twins torn apart at birth. One erased, one disappeared. One used as a test subject, the other scattered to the wind. And all of it, approved, signed off, hidden under layers of legal maneuvering and therapeutic justification. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I didn't even cry. I got organized. The first place I returned to was the courthouse. I requested my adoption records, my original birth certificate, anything and everything under the name Charlotte Nia Whitaker. The clerk, a tired woman in her 50s with half-moon glasses, blinked at me like I'd asked her for the Declaration of Independence. These files are sealed, she said. By court order. Whose order? She glanced at the computer screen again. Family Court. Signed by Judge Harlan Bexley. Dated June 19, 1985. I stared at the date. That's exactly 2 weeks after the fire. She shrugged. I can't unseal it without a petition and legal justification. I leaned in. What if I told you I'm the child listed in those records, the one who was renamed, rehomed, and systematically silenced? Her gaze softened, but she didn't break protocol. I'm sorry, but without legal backing. I handed her a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of the fire report, the journal pages from Marion, the DNA results connecting me to Jenna, and the sealed memo signed by my Uncle Alan. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them. You didn't get these from me, she said quietly. Wait here. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thin folder marked Subject CNW, Claire Whitaker Reassignment Packet. My stomach dropped. Inside were 5 documents. A signed order to rename me Claire Elizabeth Whitaker under the guardianship of Eleanor and George Whitaker. A consent form marked with a shaky signature from a temporary maternal guardian, later confirmed as Marion Grieve. A psychiatric evaluation stating, Subject continues to exhibit disorganized trauma memory, specifically concerning fire events and parental attachment. Recommended intervention identity reframe, relocation memory treatment under Dr. Brandt. A handwritten note from Alan. She has to forget. She's already begun constructing alternate realities. We cannot risk her testimony. A check stub made out to the judge's wife. $50,000. Bribery, corruption, state-sponsored erasure. I scanned every page and uploaded them to a new encrypted drive stored offline and in the cloud. 2 copies were emailed to journalists, one to Jenna, and one to a private contact I hadn't used in years. When I got home, Greg was in the kitchen holding a mug he hadn't drunk from. He looked up. "You disappeared." "I went to court," I said. "Want to guess what I found?" He didn't answer. "I know about the judge. I know about the money. I know about the name change." His mouth opened slightly, then shut. "I found my real twin, Greg." That made him flinch. "You found her. She's alive. Unlike everyone else you and your family tried to bury." "I didn't bury anyone," he snapped, voice tight. "I was just told to manage what was left." "Manage," I said flatly. "That's what you call it." "She was unstable, Claire. You were unstable. You think I liked watching you scream in your sleep? Watching you wake up and not remember your name? We didn't know what else to do. You had a choice." He leaned over the sink, breathing hard. "I did what I had to. They told me if you remembered everything, you'd shatter." I stepped forward. "You know what shatters a person living in a life that doesn't belong to them." We didn't speak after that. The next morning, he was gone. No note. Just the faint smell of his cologne on the couch pillow. I didn't chase him. That afternoon, Jenna arrived. We met in a cafe halfway between our towns. No press, no fanfare, no witnesses. She looked exactly like the photo, but more real, more grounded. Her energy was different from mine, lighter in some ways, but older in others. Like she'd been walking through her own kind of fire, just without the smoke alarms to prove it. When we hugged, it felt like closing a wound I didn't know I'd been bleeding from. "I thought I'd feel more angry," she whispered. "But all I feel is sad. For what we lost." "I feel both," I said. "And tired. So tired." We spent hours trading stories, childhood fragments, adoptive family quirks, half dreams we couldn't explain. "I used to draw her," Jenna said at one point, pulling a photo from her bag. It was a sketch of a woman with short red hair standing in front of a house on fire. "Lillian," I said. She nodded. I didn't know who she was, but I always thought she looked sad. Like she knew the fire wasn't going to kill her, it was going to set something free. I looked at her drawing and felt something settle inside me. We left the cafe with no real plan, just a promise. To stay in contact. To heal what we could. To never let them silence us again. That night back home, I opened the file again. The one I now called The Wall. The list of every person, institution, and policy that had been involved in building the life I lived. I started making calls. Reporters, lawmakers, advocacy groups, whistleblower protection programs. I wasn't just going to survive this story. I was going to tell it. Loudly. Publicly. Completely. And if they came for me, if the council tried to stop it, I had one more surprise. A scheduled release packet set to publish in 48 hours if I didn't cancel it. Everything, every page, every voice. Marion's tape. Jenna's story. The fire report. Even the photo of me as a child smiling beside the woman who should have been my mother. I wasn't afraid anymore, because the girl they tried to erase was writing herself back in. Greg came back the night the documents were scheduled to go live. It was late, close to midnight. I'd already brushed my teeth, set the automated release in place, and folded the kids' laundry with trembling hands. My mind was racing, my stomach a knot of tension, but I didn't expect the sound of the door unlocking. I didn't expect him. He stood in the hallway like a man waiting for a verdict. Eyes red-rimmed, jaw tight, shoulders slumped like he hadn't slept since he walked out. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I watched him set his keys down slowly, carefully, like he was afraid even that small sound might trigger something he couldn't take back. Finally, I asked, Why are you here? He swallowed. Because I owe you the truth. All of it. I laughed quietly, bitterly. You're about a decade late. He didn't move closer. I know. But you still need to hear it. Not from your files. Not from the board in the garage. From me. And for reasons I still don't understand, I let him speak. He started with a name. Maxwell Whitaker. Alan's father. Greg's grandfather. The real architect. A long time ago, Greg said the family got involved in something they shouldn't have. Experiments, they called them. Identity modeling. Emotional reframing. It started with soldiers' war trauma. But when that didn't yield results, they turned inward. Toward their own. You mean children? He nodded. The ones no one would believe. No one would listen to. Children from the family line who were deemed fractured or disruptive. And I was one of them. You were the one, Greg said. The one who resisted. I stared at him. You're saying they experimented on me? Not just you, but you were the first child they tried to build from scratch. After a trauma too big to control. You mean the fire? Yes. And the murder. He closed his eyes. They never said it outright. But everyone knew what Lillian was planning. She wanted to dismantle it all. And they couldn't let that happen. So they made me forget, I said slowly. To protect themselves. Yes, Greg whispered. But also because they were terrified of what you knew. What you might tell. They didn't just erase memories, Claire. They erased witnesses. I sat down. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. He continued, voice lower. My father, Alan, he orchestrated the overlay. He convinced Eleanor and George to take you, to raise you like nothing ever happened. But it wasn't a normal adoption. You were monitored, studied. Every therapist, every school, every cough logged, evaluated, managed. I stared at him. And you knew all this? Not at first, he said. But by the time we met, yes. Why did you marry me? Because I loved you, he said instantly. And because I thought I could shield you, keep you from remembering. I laughed again. Shield me by gaslighting me into silence. I thought if I didn't feed the fire, it would die. It never died, I said. It just changed shape. He looked down. When you found Marion's journal, I knew it was over. Then why did you help them again? I asked, pulling out the consent form, the one from 2019 with his name on it. He didn't deny it. They told me you were unraveling, he said. That if we didn't shut it down, you'd have a full psychotic break. They said you were seeing fires that weren't there. Because they lit the fire, I snapped. And you helped them hide the matches. I didn't know what to believe anymore, he said. But when I saw that photo of you and your real mother, the one you found in Eleanor's drawer, I realized something. What? That everything they told me was a lie. We sat in silence. Then I asked the question I had buried for years. Did you ever really love me or just the version of me they made? He met my eyes. I loved both, he said. But I never earned either. Later that night, when he had fallen asleep on the couch, too exhausted or too broken to climb the stairs, I unlocked my laptop. The countdown to the release file was at 3 hours and 21 minutes. I hovered over the cancel button, not because I doubted what I was doing, but because I wanted to be sure, completely sure. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Jenna. Just watched the recording again. I can't stop shaking. I think we need to do this together. Attached was a video file. I opened it. It was Marion's voice again, the full tape this time stitched together with fragments I hadn't heard before. She is the strongest child I've ever seen, and the most broken. If anyone can find her way out of this maze, it's Charlotte. Not Claire. Charlotte. Remember her. She's the key. I pressed save. Then I let the countdown continue. At 7 a.m. the next morning, the file dropped. It hit every inbox I'd preloaded: journalists, therapists, former employees of Westland Haven advocacy groups, 2 investigative podcasters, and 1 quiet woman in Vermont who used to be my jailer and, in her own way, my protector. The file was called The Claire Construct, a family's project to erase a child. Inside 207 pages of documents, photos, scans, tapes, and transcriptions. No commentary, no preface, just the truth. By noon, my phone was ringing nonstop. Local press, national news, one major outlet. And then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace but from a storm gathering. At 2:34 p.m., I received an encrypted message. "We see you. This isn't over. BR. Briar Resource." I read it twice. Then I smiled. Because they were right. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. They always underestimated me. That was their greatest mistake, believing I would fold, forget, fade. They mistook my silence for surrender, my confusion for compliance. But they forgot what silence can become when it's sharpened long enough. It becomes a weapon. And the night I became a threat wasn't the night I exposed them. It was the night I stopped being afraid. After the file went public, I went quiet. On the surface, I still played my role. I made school lunches. I showed up to parent-teacher conferences. I answered emails at the library, kept the fiction section alphabetized. But under the surface, I was a fault line. And I was already shifting. The media reaction to the file was instant but cautious. Some journalists reached out to verify the content. Some outlets ignored it, too explosive, too much liability. But others ran with it. One podcast, The Vanishing Memory, picked up the story within 24 hours. By day 3, the story had a name, The Claire Case. And by day 5, the retaliation began. It started subtly. My car alarm going off at 3 a.m. with no trigger. A call from the school saying a stranger had been spotted watching the boys at recess. The garbage bins turned over. The brake light cut. An anonymous email Charlotte belonged to, the silence. "You should have stayed, Claire." I reported it, of course, but with no evidence, the police shrugged it off. "You're in the spotlight now," the officer said. "People get nervous when secrets come out. Maybe consider laying low." I didn't respond. I'd already laid low for 43 years. I wasn't going back. But it wasn't until the car that I realized just how far they'd go. It was a Thursday evening. Jenna had just left after spending the afternoon helping me sort through dozens of emails from survivors and whistleblowers. We were organizing them into a master file for our attorney, a woman who had been quietly building class action cases against institutions like Westland Haven for years. The boys were at a sleepover. Greg was gone again, this time for good. He'd left a message on the answering machine the week before. "I won't fight you. I won't defend them anymore. But I also can't stay. You need to finish this alone." And so I did. That night, I grabbed my keys to drive to the corner store. I hadn't noticed anything strange. I didn't check. I should have. But something stopped me. Right as I turned the ignition, the porch light flickered, a glitch in the wiring I'd noticed weeks ago. But this time, it didn't come back on. Then the smell hit me. Gasoline. Sharp, faint but present. I cut the engine and got out. Walked to the back of the car. And there, just behind the rear tire, was a small black device taped beneath the bumper. I didn't know what it was exactly, but instinct screamed. I backed away, called Jenna, called the police, called our lawyer, and then I called one other number. A man named Andrew Beck, a former investigative officer who'd helped expose a memory suppression program in Oregon years ago. A man who had responded to my file drop with a single line. "They're watching you now. You need a shadow." He answered on the second ring. "They made a move," I said. "I'll be there in 10. Beck arrived wearing plain clothes and a calm expression. He examined the device under the car. Not explosive. Probably GPS. But if it's wired, it could have been paired with something more final. He handed it to me with gloves. "Keep this. Chain of custody. Don't let it disappear." I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you think they'll stop?" He didn't lie. "No, not unless you finish what you started." The next day, I moved the boys to my sister-in-law's house in Vermont. Jenna went with them. I packed enough for a week and told them it was just a quiet break from the noise. But I looked my older son in the eyes and said, "If anyone comes to the door and says they're here for me, don't believe them. Call Aunt Lily, then call 911. He nodded, serious. He didn't ask questions. He had seen the news. Back home, I installed new locks, closed all curtains, and then I waited. I expected surveillance. I expected more emails. But what came next was worse. It was raining the night they came. 3 figures, all in black. No markings, no words. I saw them on the door camera first, then again in the side yard, then at the back fence. They didn't knock, didn't force. They waited, like predators. I turned off all lights, sat with my laptop on the floor of the pantry typing one final message to my contact list. They are here. If this message sends incomplete, you'll know what happened. Don't let my silence be permanent. Then I sent a backup file to Beck marked last resort. He'd know what to do. I stayed in the dark for 45 minutes, and then they left. No break-in, no confrontation. Just a warning, but a clear one. We are watching. We can reach you. Stay quiet. The next morning, I got a text from Beck. Time to go public. You've waited long enough. And I agreed. I took everything we had, documents, videos, photos, timelines, and compiled them into a digital exhibit. The Whitaker Archive. Then I posted a video. My face. No filters, no makeup. Just me, raw, exhausted, defiant. Hello. My name is Charlotte Nia Whitaker. For most of my life, I was known as Claire. But Claire was a lie. I spoke for 7 minutes. About the fire, the suppression, the doctors, the erased sister, the sealed records, the threats, the silence. I ended with this. I was never meant to speak, but I've found my voice. And if you've ever been made to forget your truth, know that you are not alone. I remember, and I will not be silenced again. Then I posted it to every platform, every channel, every inbox. It went viral in 12 hours. The flood began. Hundreds of messages, survivors, patients, former staff, children who remembered locked rooms and faceless doctors, women who'd been told their children didn't survive when they'd heard them cry, families who never found graves. The Whitaker legacy cracked open like a shell, and what poured out was uglier than I'd ever imagined. Breyer Resource issued a statement denying all allegations, but the world had already chosen its side. Mine, Charlotte's. Hey, that night I didn't hide. I sat on the porch under the stars drinking tea. I didn't need armor anymore, because the girl they tried to erase, she had become a woman, and that woman had become a force. The truth isn't loud. It doesn't knock on doors or light rooms on fire. It waits. And when the lies start to crumble, when the masks slip, when the fences rot, when the safe house becomes a cage, truth steps forward, not with a shout, but with a whisper that can split the world open. In the days after the video, I became a symbol. Not by choice, not by design, just by default. They called me the unwritten twin on podcasts, the memory ghost in headlines, the face of suppressed trauma, rewritten identity, and systemic betrayal. But I didn't feel powerful. I felt raw, tired, more real than I ever had and more uncertain than ever about what came next. The world wanted interviews, documentaries, a book deal. What I wanted was breath, stillness, and answers that only time could give me. Jenna came home. We sat in the sunroom that weekend, windows cracked open, coffee cooling between us, and read through the letters. Not emails, actual letters. Hundreds had arrived at the P.O. box I set up before the drop from women who'd lived through similar silences. From men who remembered sisters lost to institutions. From children, now adults who knew they weren't crazy for remembering what everyone told them never happened. Jenna read them aloud, voice breaking every third line. One letter was from a nurse who had worked at Briar Hill in 1987. She wrote, "We were told you were special, that if we kept you quiet, you might live a normal life. I believed them, until I saw your drawing. It was a fire, and 3 bodies, and you were screaming. I am so sorry, I should have told someone." Jenna folded the letter and placed it on the table beside the rest. Then she took my hand. "We can't fix the past," she said. "No," I agreed, "but we can stop it from happening again." That was when the archive became something bigger. No longer just a public drop, no longer a wall of receipts. We turned it into a foundation one for survivors of psychiatric abuse, memory suppression, and institutionalized identity manipulation. We called it the Remembering, because remembering is resistance. We brought on lawyers, therapists, volunteers. We created a registry for names that had vanished. We tracked burial sites. We connected estranged siblings. We helped families piece themselves back together with nothing but fragments and faith. And every week we read one name out loud. One person lost to silence now spoken into the world. And one person found. A few months later, I got a call from Beck. "You're not going to believe this," he said. He was right. It was the tape. Marion's tape. The original, the one I thought I'd lost when I digitized it and hid it away. It had turned up in a private auction, under a different title, Project Clementine Child Voice Protocol, 1985. Beck had intercepted it, bought it before it could disappear. When I held the cassette again, the actual object, not a file, I cried for the first time in weeks. Not because I was sad. Because I had something they didn't. A voice, proof, and a name they couldn't erase. Greg never returned. We spoke one last time over the phone. He asked how the boys were, asked if I hated him. I told him I didn't know how I felt, that I would always be grateful for the love he gave me, even if it came wrapped in lies. But I didn't say goodbye. I let the silence speak for me. He understood. Some silences say we're done. Others say we were never real to begin with. The last wall I had to break was internal. For weeks I dreamed of that room, the one with the fire, the screams, the locked door. But in my final dream, I saw something new. I wasn't alone. A small girl stood beside me, eyes wide, face smudged with soot. She reached out, and I took her hand. Not to pull her forward, not to drag her into Claire's world, but to sit with her, to tell her she wasn't crazy. She was stolen. She was real. She was me. And she was free now. It's been a year since the file dropped. The foundation has grown beyond me. Jenna's face is now in front of more cameras than mine. She's better with words, gentler, more forgiving. I work behind the scenes, building names into walls that were once blank, watching women reclaim their truths, watching families pull apart threads and reweave something honest. I don't flinch when I hear Charlotte anymore. I turn when someone calls it. I answer, and I mean it. If you're watching this, if you've come this far, you already know this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about survival. It's a story about the girl who was built to be quiet but chose to speak. It's a story about the fire that didn't destroy me but made me see the blueprints behind the walls. So if you've ever questioned your own memory, if someone told you it didn't happen, if they convinced you to forget, let this be your reminder. You don't owe anyone your silence. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remember. Fade out. Final 300 words of emotional closure. The sun is setting now. I'm sitting on the back porch, feet bare, a cup of tea beside me. The boys are inside arguing over something trivial, their voices full of life I never thought I'd get to witness so freely. Jenna will visit tomorrow. We'll read another letter. Maybe plant something in the garden. Something that lasts. The old corkboard is gone. The red strings are tucked away. Not forgotten. Just archived. I don't live two lives anymore. I'm not the perfect mother by day and the secret hunter by night. I'm just me, whole, messy, remembered, real. They tried to kill the truth. But the truth isn't something you bury. The truth grows roots. It waits. And when it blooms, it's unstoppable. If this story found something inside you, don't let it stay silent. Share it. Speak your name. And if you need to be heard, leave a comment or subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because here, memory is power. And you are not alone.